So for this lesson, we're going to look at comparing and ordering fractions by using common denominators. Now remember that a denominator is the number on the bottom of the fraction. Okay, the numerator is on top, denominator is on the bottom. So if the parts of the fraction are the same size, then we can compare them quite easily. Okay, so we want to make all these denominators the same so that we can compare the fractions. So what I want you to do is take a look at these three fractions, 3/4, 3/5, and 5/8. These are the same three fractions that we were working with in our last lesson. And see if you can turn these numbers by multiplying into another number that they all share. So for example, can you turn the 4, the 5, and the 8 all into 10 or 20 or 15 or whatever it is by multiplying? So you're going to multiply the 4 by some number, the 5 by a different number, and the 8 by a different number, and try to find a number that you can turn them all into. So pause the video and try to figure that out. So what we're trying to do here is, again, find out if we can multiply the denominator, the 4, the 5, the 8, by some different numbers to all get to the same number, the same denominator. That's called a common denominator. So in order to do this, we want to look at the multiples of each of these. So I'm looking at 4 in this particular fraction, and I want to look at, say, the first 10 multiples of 4. So those are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, and 40. And then the same thing for 5. The first 10 multiples are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. And lastly, the first 10 multiples of 8 are 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72, and 80. Okay, we're going to try to look at all of these multiples of each denominator and see if we can find one that they all share. So here they are all laid out next to each other. So again, we're looking for a common denominator. So I'm looking for a multiple of all these denominators that they share. Right away, I see that there's a couple of 8s here. So 4 has 8 as a multiple. 4 times 2 is 8. And 8 is obviously a multiple of 8 because 8 times 1 is 8. However, all 3 of these need to share a number. Right now it's just 4 and 8. You probably noticed that the multiples of 5, they all end in either a 5 or a 0. So that tells me that if I look for a number in the 4 multiples, and if it ends in a 5 or a 0, it has to also be a multiple of 5. So for example, I go along here, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So this ends in a 0. So I look down in the row of 5, and there it is as well. Okay? However, 20 is not a multiple of 8, so I have to keep on going. Okay, so you want to search through all these numbers to try to find a number that they all share. If you can't find one, then what you would do is you would do the next, say, 5 or 10 multiples, and then just keep on looking. Or you can do what we did last lesson, and you can create fraction strips, or those rectangles, those strips of paper, and you can compare the fractions that way. Later on, we'll learn how fractions and decimals are related, and you'll learn of an even easier way to compare fractions. But for now, this lesson's about finding a common denominator. So try to find out which number all 3 of these denominators share. Hopefully you found out that they all have 40 as their common denominator. 40 is a multiple of 4. It's 4 times 10 is 40. And 40 is a multiple of 5. And 40 is a multiple of 8. So what we need to do now is create our equivalent fractions. So again, our fractions that we were initially dealing with here that we're comparing are 3/4, 3/5, and 5/8. So I want to turn 3/4 into an equivalent fraction that has 40 as a denominator. So the initial denominator is a 4. So how can I turn 4 into 40 by multiplying? Well, 4 times 10 is 40. So then what I would do is if I multiplied the denominators by 10, I also have to multiply the numerators by 10 to keep it an equivalent fraction. For this one, for 3/5, to get from 5 to 40, I have to multiply 5 by 8. So then I have to do the same to the numerator, 3 times 8. And the last one, 8 times 5 is 40. So multiply the top by 5 as well. 5 times 5 will give me my numerator here for this equivalent fraction. So we're creating our equivalent fractions here. So again, because I multiplied 4 by 10 to get to 40 here, I multiply the top by 10, so 3 times 10 is 30. To go from 5 to 40, multiplied it by 8, so times the top by 8. 3 times 8 is 24. And for our last fraction here, 8 times 5 is 40, so multiply the top by 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So our equivalent fractions, 3/4 becomes 30 over 40, 3/5 becomes 24 over 40, and 5/8 becomes 25 over 40, or 25/40. Now that they all have the exact same denominator, we can compare them really easily, because imagine these were represented as a circle or a rectangle. It would be split up into 40 equal sections, each one of these. So this would be 30 out of 40 sections will be shaded in. This will be 24 out of 40 will be shaded in, and this one, 25 out of 40 sections will be shaded in. So it's really easy to compare to see what's bigger and what's smaller. So when I compare them, I can see that 24/40 are less than 25/40, 25/40 are less than 30/40. So if I want to put them in order from least to greatest, or smallest to biggest, I want to put in the original fractions, not the equivalent ones that I turned them all into. I created equivalent fractions that all have a common denominator of 40, just so that I can compare them. But now that I have compared them, I want to put in the original fractions. So again, the smallest one is 24/40, and that was 3/5. So that would be our first fraction if we're ordering from least or smallest to greatest. So then the second fraction, the middle one, 25/40, was actually this one, 5/8. So that goes in the middle here. And then the largest fraction would be 30/40. That was originally 3/4. So that would go here. So from least to greatest, 3/5, 5/8, 3/4.